Human rescues alien girl from ruined marshlands, but human hears the water whisper her fate. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Jake Anderson had always been used to harsh environments. As a rescue operative for the Earth Defense Force, he had faced blizzards, wildfires, and flooded cities, but today was different. The land stretched out before him, a desolate marshland, its ground soft and sinking beneath his boots. The sky above was a dull gray, heavy with the threat of rain. In the distance, broken trees swayed, their limbs like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. The smell of decayed plant matter hung thick in the air, mixing with the damp chill that clung to his clothes. As Jake trudged through the muck, his breath shallow from the thickening air, he wondered what had brought him here today. A distress signal had come in, an alien girl, stranded and alone. The coordinates were vague, nothing more than a faint pulse from a distant emergency beacon. With the nearest settlement miles away, Jake had taken it upon himself to investigate, not knowing exactly what he would find. His radio crackled to life, and a voice broke through the static. "Commander Anderson, the storm's moving in fast. You should head back to base." Jake glanced up at the sky, now darkening ominously. He was about to respond when something caught his eye. Through the trees, just at the edge of a small clearing, he saw her. At first, he thought it was a mirage, too surreal to be real, but the faint shimmer of her skin under the dull light proved otherwise. She stood alone, her pale, almost ethereal blue skin glowing faintly, her silver hair flowing around her like a halo. The girl's eyes, wide and full of fear, locked onto his, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Her clothes were torn, clinging to her slender frame, and she was surrounded by the remains of what looked like a small shelter, nothing but splintered wood and crumbled fabric. Jake hesitated only for a moment before rushing toward her. "Hey," he called out, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "Are you okay?" She flinched at his voice, but didn't run. Instead, she took a cautious step back, her eyes darting around nervously. Jake knelt down to her level, trying not to startle her further. "I'm here to help," he said gently, but the girl only looked at him, her gaze unreadable. For a few moments, they remained like that, him on one knee in the muck, her standing in front of him, her breath quickening. Then, with a soft tremor in her voice, she spoke. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her words barely audible above the wind. Jake frowned, confusion sweeping over him. "Why? What's going on here?" Before she could respond, the faintest ripple of sound caught his attention. It was like a whisper, but not from her. It came from the water around them, soft, eerie, as though the marsh itself were speaking. The girl froze, her face turning pale as the whisper grew louder, filling the air. "It knows my fate," she murmured, her voice trembling with fear. "The water, it knows." Jake's heart pounded in his chest. What had he just heard? The whisper didn't make sense, but the girl's wide eyes and the terror in her expression told him that something far beyond his understanding was happening here. He reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. "Whatever it is, I'm here to help you. We'll get out of here together." But the girl shook her head slowly. "It's too late for me." And with that, the ground beneath them rumbled softly, as if the marsh itself were reacting to her words. Jake stood motionless for a moment, his hand still resting lightly on the girl's arm. Her eyes were wide with a fear that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the swamp itself. The air was thick, as if the very marsh around them was pressing in on them, unwilling to let them go. He glanced at the water, still whispering in eerie murmurs that seemed to speak directly to the girl. He couldn't understand what it was saying, but the way she trembled suggested that whatever it wasn't good. "It knows my fate," she had whispered, her voice almost drowned out by the wind. Jake looked back at her, his heart racing as he tried to process everything that had just happened. "What do you mean?" he asked softly, doing his best to keep his voice calm. "What's going on here?" She swallowed hard, her hands gripping the edges of her torn clothing as though it could anchor her to this world. I shouldn't be here," she said, her voice shaky but resolute. This place, it's alive. It's watching me. Jake frowned. He didn't know what she meant, but something in the way she said it sent a chill down his spine. He glanced around, scanning the darkening horizon. The marsh stretched endlessly in every direction, an endless expanse of still water and twisted trees. The air was heavy with moisture, and the silence that hung over the place was thick, almost oppressive. He could feel the weight of the girl's words pressing down on him. "We'll get out of here," Jake said firmly, squeezing her arm. "You're safe now." She shook her head slowly, her eyes full of pain. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's too late for me. I'm the last of my kind." Her voice cracked as she spoke, as though the words themselves were too heavy to bear. Jake's heart clenched at the sadness in her tone. He didn't know what she meant, but he knew one thing for sure. She was in pain, and he couldn't leave her here. "Not like this." "You're not alone," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to help you." But she only looked at him, her eyes hollow with despair. "You can't change what's already been set in motion," she murmured. The whispers of the water grew louder, as though in response to her words, and Jake felt an uneasy shiver run down his spine. He didn't know what to do, but he couldn't just stand there and do nothing. He had to act. Without another word, Jake stepped forward, pulling the girl gently with him. "We're leaving this place," he said, more to himself than to her. She didn't resist, but he could feel her reluctance, as though the swamp had a grip on her that she couldn't shake. He led her toward the edge of the marsh, where a small, abandoned shelter stood, its frame barely visible in the dimming light. The storm was coming, and they had to find shelter before it hit. As they neared the shelter, Jake could hear the whispers of the water growing fainter, but still, the feeling of dread lingered in the air. The girl, Serial, remained quiet, her steps slow and hesitant. Jake couldn't help but notice the way she moved, graceful, but with an underlying sense of unease, as if she was afraid of what might happen next. He glanced at her, searching for some kind of answer, but all he found in her eyes was a deep, ancient sadness that made his heart ache. He didn't know what the future held, but for now, all he could do was keep her safe. They reached the shelter just as the first raindrops began to fall, the sound of the storm drowning out the last whispers of the water. Inside, the shelter was empty, cold, and abandoned, but it was a refuge for the moment. Jake helped Serial sit on the dirt floor, the storm picking up outside, its wind howling through the cracks in the shelter's walls. As he set about securing the door, he glanced back at her, his mind racing with questions. Who was she really? What had brought her to this place? And what was the connection between her and the marsh? Serial sat silently, her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes distant. The storm raged outside, but inside the shelter, an uneasy quiet hung in the air. Jake didn't know what was happening, but he was sure of one thing. Serial wasn't just any alien girl. There was something more to her story, something that the marsh, and the whispers, knew, but she had yet to reveal. Jake sat across from Serial, the storm howling outside the shelter. The rain beat down relentlessly, making the roof creak and groan under the pressure. Inside, the air was thick with tension, and the only sound was the occasional drip of water leaking through the walls. Jake shifted uncomfortably, his mind racing with questions. Serial had been silent since they arrived, her gaze distant, lost in thoughts he couldn't begin to understand. He had tried to speak to her, but she had only offered cryptic replies, her voice trembling with an emotion he couldn't place. He needed to know more. "Serial," Jake said, breaking the silence. "I don't know what's going on here, but I'm not leaving you. We need to figure this out together." She looked at him then, her eyes wide and full of something. Fear, sorrow, and maybe a hint of gratitude. But it was the way she looked at him, as if she was seeing something far beyond him, something ancient, that made his heart race. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice low, barely audible over the storm. "This place, it's part of me, and I'm part of it. The water, it knows." Jake felt his pulse quicken, but he held his ground, determined not to show the fear that was slowly creeping into his chest. "The water?" he asked, his voice steady despite the confusion that clouded his thoughts. "What do you mean? What does it know?" Serial shuddered slightly, wrapping her arms tightly around her knees. "It's more than just water. It's alive. It's been calling to me ever since I arrived. It knows my fate." Jake could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. He didn't know what she was talking about, but the way she said it, the certainty in her voice, told him that whatever she was dealing with, it wasn't just a simple problem. She wasn't just a stranded alien girl. There was something far deeper at play here. How do you know this? Jake asked, trying to make sense of what she was saying. What's your connection to it? Serial looked away, her eyes drifting to the corner of the shelter, where the faintest glimmer of moonlight filtered through a crack in the wall. For a moment, Jake thought she might not answer him. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. My people, we are connected to the land, to the water. It's a bond that goes back centuries. We believe that the world speaks to us, that the land and the water can guide us, show us our paths. But I broke that bond. Jake didn't understand. The way she spoke, it sounded as if she were speaking of something far older than any technology he had ever encountered. He was used to the sharp clarity of military orders, the logic of science, but this was something different. Something ancient. You broke the bond? He asked, his brow furrowing. How? Serial closed her eyes, her expression pained. My people, we were betrayed, she said softly. The land, the water, they turned away from us. And when we tried to fight back, to restore balance, the bond was severed. I was cast out. The rain outside intensified, the sound of the storm almost deafening now. But within the shelter, it felt like the world had grown still, as if time itself was holding its breath. So, the water knows about this? Jake asked, his mind struggling to grasp what she was saying. It's been calling to you because of what happened to your people. Serial nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the spot where the faint moonlight touched the floor. Yes, she whispered. It knows what happened, and it's been trying to reach me, trying to warn me. Jake sat in silence, absorbing her words. He couldn't understand it, not fully. But what he did understand was that Serial was in pain, and she needed him. She needed someone to help her, even if the threat was something as intangible and unexplainable as the water itself. He stood up, taking a step closer to her, his hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture of reassurance. We'll figure this out, he said, his voice firm. I'm not going anywhere, Serial. We'll face this together. She turned her gaze to him then, her eyes filled with a quiet gratitude that made his heart swell. Thank you, she whispered. For the first time since they had met, Jake saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, and it gave him the strength to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could overcome whatever was coming for them. Jake stared at Serial, his heart pounding in his chest. The air in the shelter felt thick, as if the storm outside had settled inside with them. She had told him everything, about her people, the broken bond, and the strange whispers of the water. But it didn't make sense. How could something as intangible as water hold such power? And why was it calling to her? As he sat next to her, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was something far bigger than either of them at play here. The land, the water, the whispers, it was all connected in ways he didn't understand. Serial's story felt like a riddle wrapped in mystery. She had been cast out, abandoned by her people, and now the water itself seemed to be haunting her. What happens now? Jake asked, his voice quiet but firm. What do we do about the water? About the whispers? Serial didn't answer right away. She was staring out the crack in the shelter, her eyes distant again. It was clear she was lost in thought, wrestling with her own fears and doubts. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. The water is part of me, she said, as though the words were difficult to form. But it's also a part of something much older. Something dangerous. It's been calling to me because it knows what I am, what I was supposed to become. Jake's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what she was saying. What do you mean, what you were supposed to become? He asked, leaning forward, his voice filled with curiosity and concern. Serial's eyes flickered with sadness. I was meant to be the one to restore the bond, she whispered, her voice trembling. To bring balance back to my people. But I failed. I couldn't protect them. And now, the water, it's angry. It's punishing me for my failure. Jake sat back, absorbing her words. He hadn't expected this. It wasn't just about her survival anymore. She had been chosen for something important, something that could change the fate of her entire species. And now, that destiny was slipping through her fingers. Is there any way to fix it? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Can you still do what you were meant to do? Serial shook her head slowly, her silver hair falling over her shoulders like a curtain. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't even know if I can trust the water anymore. I thought it was my guide, my protector. But now, it feels like a curse. It knows what I failed to do, and it will never let me forget it." Jake felt a pang of sympathy for her. He couldn't fully understand what she was going through, but he could see the weight of her guilt, the burden of a responsibility she couldn't fulfill. But one thing he knew for certain: he wasn't going to let her face it alone. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. "We'll figure it out together," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "I don't know what this water is, or what it wants from you. But I'm here. We'll find a way." For the first time since they had met, a faint smile flickered across Serial's face, a small spark of hope in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. Jake nodded, his resolve strengthening. Whatever this was, whatever challenge lay ahead, they would face it together. The storm outside raged on, but inside the shelter, there was a quiet understanding between them. They didn't have all the answers, but for now, they had each other. And that was enough. Jake woke up to the sound of the storm outside, the relentless downpour, now only a background hum. The wind had died down, but the eerie stillness of the marshlands surrounding the shelter hadn't faded. He sat up on the cold ground, rubbing his face, trying to shake the sleep from his mind. His eyes moved to Serial, who still sat near the corner of the shelter, her posture tense, as if she hadn't slept at all. She had been up all night, staring into the distance, her mind heavy with the weight of her people's loss and the mysterious force that seemed to haunt her. The water, the whispers, it was all too much for her to bear. Jake had no way of knowing how to fix things, but he knew that something had to be done. He couldn't let her face this alone, not when he could offer her something. Hope, even if it was a small spark. "Serial," he called softly, his voice breaking the silence. She turned her head to face him, but her eyes remained distant, unfocused. "Are you okay?" She blinked, as though coming back to the present moment. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Jake waited, giving her the time she needed. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know how much longer I can keep running from it," she said quietly. "The water, the whispers, they're getting louder. It's like it's calling me, pulling me back." Jake stood up, crossing the small space between them and kneeling down in front of her. "You don't have to run anymore," he said firmly. "We'll figure this out together. But we need to find out more about what's really happening. You said before that the water is angry, right?" Serial nodded slowly, her fingers twitching nervously at her sides. "I've always believed in the bond between my people and the land. But now it feels like the land itself has turned against me. Like it's judging me." Jake swallowed, trying to make sense of it. "And you think the water's part of that? Part of your people's connection?" She nodded again, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just water. It's an ancient force, something older than my people. It's been with us for centuries, but I was never supposed to break the bond. And now I have." Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. This wasn't just about saving her anymore. It was about understanding something far greater than either of them. "Is there a way to restore it?" he asked. "A way to fix what's broken?" For the first time in hours, Serial looked at him fully, her eyes meeting his with a sense of quiet desperation. "I don't know," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I thought I could bring balance back, but it's too late now. I'm not the one who can do it." Jake shook his head, his heart sinking. "Don't say that. You're not alone in this." He took her hands in his, feeling the coldness in her skin, the tremble that ran through her. "We can find a way. We have to. But you have to let me help you." For a long moment, she said nothing, only stared at their joined hands. Then, slowly, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I don't know if there's anything left to fix," she whispered. "The water already knows what's going to happen. It's too late for me." Jake didn't let go of her hands. He wasn't going to let her give up. "Not now." "You're wrong," he said firmly. "It's not too late. We're going to figure this out. Together." He gave her hands a gentle squeeze, and after a long pause, she finally nodded, a small, uncertain smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Jake felt a flicker of hope, a spark that made him believe, just for a moment, that maybe they could still make things right. But the storm outside had not finished, and the whispers in the water still lingered in the air, waiting for them to confront the truth that they both feared. They didn't know what awaited them, But they did know one thing. They weren't facing it alone. Not anymore. Jake paced the small shelter, the weight of Serial's words pressing down on him. The storm outside had calmed, but the silence inside felt oppressive. He had promised to help her, to find a way to restore what had been broken, but he had no idea where to even begin. The whispers of the water still echoed in his mind, a constant reminder that they were running out of time. Serial sat on the floor, her back against the wall, her eyes closed as though she was trying to shut out the world. He could see the toll this was taking on her, the uncertainty and fear clouding her every thought. Jake stopped in front of her, his heart heavy with empathy. "Serial," he said, his voice gentle. "We have to move forward. Whatever happened with your people, whatever happened with the water, it's not over yet. We still have a chance." She opened her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze. Her expression was a mix of exhaustion and resignation. "I don't know if there's a chance left," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The water, it's too much. It has its own will. It controls everything, and I'm just a part of it now. I can't escape it." Jake crouched down in front of her, his hands resting on her knees. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You're not just a part of the water. You're more than that. You're not alone. We can figure this out together, but you have to trust me." Serial looked at him, the conflict in her eyes clear. She wanted to believe him, but the fear inside her was too strong. What if it's already too late? What if I'm already beyond saving? Jake shook his head. "It's never too late. I don't care what's in the water, or how deep the bond goes. We'll fight it. Together." She took a deep breath, as though trying to find the courage to believe him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The shelter was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the roof and the distant sound of the marsh. Finally, Serial spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "There is one place," she said slowly, "where the water's power can be controlled. A place where the bond was created. But it's far. It's dangerous. And I don't know if we can even survive the journey." Jake didn't hesitate. "We'll make it. Tell me where it is." Serial closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, focusing on him. "It's beyond the Marshlands. There's a hidden valley, deep in the mountains. That's where the ritual took place. The place where the bond was formed. If we can reach it, maybe we can restore the balance." Jake nodded, his determination unwavering. "Then that's where we're going." Serial stared at him for a long time, as though searching for any sign of doubt. But all she saw was resolve in his eyes. For the first time in what felt like ages, a spark of hope flickered in her chest. She wasn't sure what awaited them on that journey, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't facing it alone. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake smiled, giving her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together." The storm had passed, but the road ahead was uncertain. The journey would be long, and the dangers they would face were unknown. But in that moment, Jake knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her face it alone. They would find the valley, and they would restore what was broken. Together, Jake and Serial set out at dawn, the air crisp and filled with the scent of wet earth. The storm had passed, leaving the marshlands eerily quiet. A heavy fog clung to the ground, making it difficult to see far ahead. Jake adjusted his pack, the weight of the equipment pressing against his back, but he barely noticed it. His focus was on the path ahead, the journey to the hidden valley that Serial had spoken of. She walked beside him, her steps light despite the rough terrain, but Jake could tell she was still lost in her thoughts. Her eyes often drifted toward the distant mountains, as if searching for something, some sign that they were heading in the right direction. "How far is it?" Jake asked after several hours of walking in silence. "A couple of days' journey," Serial replied, her voice distant. "But the land will grow more dangerous as we get closer. The valley is protected by natural forces, but it's not an easy place to reach." Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the fog around them. The air was thick with moisture, and every step they took seemed to echo in the stillness. "We'll make it," he said confidently. "We've come this far." Serial glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I wish I had your confidence," she said, her voice soft. "But you don't know what we're up against. The land itself doesn't want us there." Jake stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her. "Then we'll make it want us there," he said with a determined grin. "We're not turning back. Not now." Serial met his gaze, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Jake thought she might argue, but instead, she simply nodded. I hope you're right, she whispered. They continued their journey, moving through the thick underbrush, the ground soft beneath their boots. As the hours passed, the fog began to lift, and the landscape around them started to change. The once barren marshlands gave way to dense forests, the trees towering above them, their leaves a vibrant green despite the harsh conditions. The air was cooler here, and Jake could feel the shift in the atmosphere. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. We're getting closer, Cyril said, her voice barely audible. Can you feel it? Jake nodded, his senses heightened. There was something in the air, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. The further they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees grew larger, their trunks twisted and gnarled, as though they had been bent by some unseen force. The ground was uneven, and the trail they were following became harder to navigate. Jake couldn't help but feel that the forest was closing in on them, as if it were alive, watching their every move. This is it, Cyril said, her voice shaking slightly. We're close. Jake looked around, trying to find any sign of the hidden valley, but all he saw were the towering trees and the dense fog that had started to creep in again. Where is it? He asked. It should be here. Cyril's gaze was fixed ahead, her eyes narrowed as she searched the trees. It's not just a place, she said quietly. It's a place that only reveals itself when it's ready. We have to prove ourselves worthy to enter. Jake's brow furrowed. How do we do that? Cyril didn't answer immediately. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, Jake thought she was listening to the whispers again. When she opened them, there was a new intensity in her gaze. We have to call it, she said simply. We have to reach out to the valley and show it that we are not enemies. Jake stood still, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Call it. How? Cyril stepped forward, her movements graceful despite the uncertainty in her voice. She closed her eyes again and raised her hands to the sky, as though trying to connect with something beyond the physical world. Jake watched her, unsure of what was happening, but trusting her. After a few moments, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees. The air around them seemed to hum with energy. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the atmosphere shifted. The fog parted, and in the distance, Jake saw it, a shimmering light, faint at first, but growing stronger with each passing second. It's here, Cyril whispered. We've been accepted. They both stood in silence, watching as the valley slowly revealed itself, its entrance glowing with an otherworldly light. It was more beautiful than Jake could have ever imagined, and for the first time since their journey began, he felt a sense of peace. They had made it, and now, they would face whatever awaited them inside. Jake and Cyril stepped forward, the shimmering light growing brighter with every step they took. It was as if the valley itself was alive, responding to their presence. The air was filled with a strange warmth, despite the chill of the surrounding forest. It felt welcoming, as if the land had been waiting for them. Jake glanced at Cyril, her expression a mix of awe and disbelief. She had been right. The valley was revealing itself, just as she had said it would. But even with the beauty surrounding them, Jake could sense an underlying tension in the air. Something was still not quite right. Are you okay? Jake asked quietly, his voice cutting through the stillness. Cyril nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the glowing entrance. I never thought I would see it again, she murmured. The valley, it's more than I remember. They continued walking, the path before them now clear and smooth, unlike the rough terrain they had traversed earlier. The trees on either side parted, revealing a vast, open space ahead. In the center, a large pool of water sat, its surface as still as glass, reflecting the soft glow of the valley. This is it, Cyril said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is where it all began. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine as they approached the pool. There was something about it that felt ancient, like it held the secrets of a forgotten world. Cyril stopped at the edge, staring down at the water with a deep sadness in her eyes. The bond. This is where it was forged, she said, her voice thick with emotion. This is where my people and the land were connected. But now it's broken. Jake looked at her, his heart aching for the weight of her words. He could see the pain in her expression, the burden of her failure. But he also saw something else, hope. It was faint, but it was there. Maybe it's not broken, Jake said gently. Maybe it's just waiting for you to fix it. Serial looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. How can I fix it? I failed once. What makes you think I can do it now? Jake took a step closer to her, his voice steady and reassuring. Because you're not alone. We're in this together. We can fix this, Serial. You don't have to do it alone. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she knelt down beside the pool, her fingers brushing the surface of the water. The glow from the pool seemed to intensify, and for a brief moment, Jake thought he saw something shift in the water, a ripple, though the surface remained perfectly still. Serial closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. I'm ready, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake stood beside her, watching as she focused on the water. The whispers that had been haunting her for so long seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie stillness. It was as if the entire valley had gone quiet, waiting for something. Serial raised her hands, palms open, and slowly brought them over the surface of the water. Jake held his breath, unsure of what was happening, but trusting Serial's instincts. The water shimmered beneath her touch, glowing brighter than before. For a moment, the light seemed to envelop them both, a soft warmth that filled the air. And then, suddenly, the whispers returned. But this time, they weren't just whispers. They were words, clear and distinct, echoing in their minds. The bond is restored, the water seemed to say. The balance has been returned. Serial's eyes flew open, her expression one of wonder. Jake felt a rush of relief wash over him. They had done it. They had fixed the bond. The valley, the water, it had accepted them. For the first time since they had started this journey, Jake felt a sense of peace settle in his chest. The land had spoken, and the connection was whole again. Serial stood up slowly, her hands still hovering over the pool. It's done, she said, her voice filled with awe. Jake smiled, his heart swelling with pride. We did it. They stood there for a moment, basking in the silence that had followed the restoration of the bond. The valley, once filled with sorrow and uncertainty, now felt peaceful, whole. Jake glanced at Serial, her face soft with relief. You didn't fail, Serial, he said, his voice full of conviction. You were never alone in this. We made it through together. She looked at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. For the first time, Jake saw her truly smile, a smile that reached her eyes and lit up her face. It was a smile full of hope, full of the promise of a new beginning. They had come so far, and now, for the first time, the future seemed bright. They had restored the balance. They had fixed what was broken. And together, they had found a way to move forward. Jake and Serial stood at the edge of the glowing pool, the energy from the restored bond still humming in the air around them. The valley, once heavy with tension and uncertainty, now felt alive with a peaceful aura. The whispers had quieted, leaving only the soft rustling of leaves and the distant calls of unseen creatures. Jake could feel the weight of the journey lifting, but there was something more, something unspoken between them. The air seemed to shimmer with possibilities, with the promise of a future that was now within their grasp. Serial stood beside him, her expression serene, but there was a lingering sadness in her eyes that hadn't quite faded. It's over, she said softly, her voice a whisper against the stillness of the valley. I never thought I'd see this place again. And now it's finally done. Jake turned to her, his gaze steady and kind. You did it, he said, his voice full of quiet pride. You restored the bond. You didn't fail. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the light of the valley, and for a moment, Jake could see the weight of the past fall away from her shoulders. It was as though she was finally free, finally able to breathe without the burden of guilt and fear that had haunted her for so long. I didn't do it alone, she said, her voice soft but filled with conviction. You were with me every step of the way. You helped me find my way back. Jake smiled, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and pride. I told you we could do this together. For a long moment, they stood there, side by side, the peaceful energy of the valley washing over them. It was hard to believe how far they had come, how much they had overcome. From the desolate marshlands to the hidden valley, from the whispers of the water to the restored balance, they had faced everything together. And now, they were standing on the edge of something new, something they had both longed for without even realizing it. Serial finally broke the silence, her voice quiet but steady. I never thought I would find peace again, she said, her eyes distant as she gazed out over the valley. I thought I was lost, that my people were lost. But this changes everything. Jake nodded, his eyes following hers as they looked out over the land. The valley stretched before them, its beauty unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a place of healing, of renewal, a place where the past could finally rest and the future could begin. We've both been through so much, he said, his voice low and thoughtful. But I think this is where we start over. Serial turned to him then, her eyes bright with unspoken emotion. Start over? She asked, her voice filled with curiosity. What do you mean? Jake smiled, his heart light with a sense of hope he hadn't known in a long time. We have a chance to build something new. Not just for you, but for both of us. The water spoke, and it brought us here. But now, it's up to us to decide what comes next. Serial's lips parted in surprise, and for a moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from her in days. You're right, she said, her voice filled with warmth. We have a future, a real one. Jake reached out then, placing his hand gently on hers, a gesture of comfort and connection. We'll face it together, he said softly, the words carrying more weight than anything he had said before. They stood there for a while, not speaking, just letting the peace of the valley wash over them. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for them to take the next step. And when they finally did, they would do it together, with the bond they had restored between them, and the future they had yet to build. For the first time in a long time, Jake felt truly at peace, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, he wouldn't face them alone.